Hello there, people. Welcome to Flight Review. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, I am here to give my thoughts this week on the latest and possibly final entry in the Sony Spider-Man Cinematic Universe, and that is Kraven the Hunter, starring Aaron Taylor Johnson, Russell Crowe, Ariana DeBose, and Alessandro Nivola, among others. But before getting into my very honest thoughts with respect to this particular film, do want to remind everybody that this show, along with my other shows, the FLITEcast, Flight Chat, and others, can be found at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts, Google Podcasts, not Google Podcasts, pardon me, YouTube. Google Podcasts is no more. YouTube is where you can find the FLITEcast podcast, my YouTube channel at the FLITEcast. You can find this show, also Apple Podcasts as well, in addition to the original FlightCast.com website. And also want to take a moment to thank all of the Patreon supporters that I hope will soon be enjoying what I am calling 12 Days of Flight Review. 12 days of reviews where I am reviewing, up until Christmas Eve, 12 different Christmas movies. Some of my favorite Christmas movies, and at least one or two that I either need to give another chance or haven't seen before in that regard. But I'm going in descending order of preference, so I'm going to start with, I don't want to say my least favorite, but I'm going to start with maybe a lower rung and get all the way up to my favorite, which will be released on December 24th, Christmas Eve. All of these will be on patreon.com/theflightcast. So for those of you loyal patrons, I hope that you enjoy it. Thank you so much for your support in that regard. And anybody that wishes to sign up for Patreon and listen to what I have to say with respect to these 12 specialized Christmas films, you most certainly can. Just go to patreon.com/theflightcast and sign up to be a flight officer. That is what will get you the unlocked tier to listen to all of that, plus all the other flight review and flight box and flight report episodes that I've done for the Patreon in the last couple of years. So thank you very much for all of your support, and hope everybody enjoys the upcoming content. All right. Let's dive into a discussion about Kraven the Hunter, because I don't foresee this being a terribly long discussion for a number of reasons, but let's just get one thing out of the way first. And those of you who have listened to this show for an extended period of time, you already know what I'm about to say. You know what the first thing I'm going to say with respect to this movie is, and that is the following. If you have come to this episode, if you have come to this show listening or looking for a half an hour of bashing of Sony, a half an hour of bashing of all of their live-action Spider-Man films, and just all manner of complaining and caterwauling and grousing about, I can't believe it, who asked for this movie, why would they even make it, why would they even bother to do this, go somewhere else. Seriously, go somewhere else. I don't have time for that level of negativity. I've already seen the bullshit reviews, I've already seen the anger, I've already seen the snark, and this is why I hate critics. I don't like critics whatsoever, because they always have to infuse their own shitty opinions and their own negative bullshit into their reviews. I've seen the wording, and it's no different than what they've done with all the other previous Sony Spider-Man Universe films. Well, here, just a quick reminder to everybody with respect to Ray's position on the Sony Spider-Man Universe. We're talking about, what, 6 movies? Right, let's count them. 7 movies, pardon me. 7 live-action films in the Sony Spider-Man universe. We've got Venom, Venom Let There Be Carnage, Morbius, Madam Web, Venom the Last Dance, and now Kraven the Hunter. As of the time of me recording this episode, I own all of those movies except for Morbius, which I will own, Venom the Last Dance, which I will also own, and Kraven the Hunter because it just released. I own Venom, I own Venom the Last Dance, and maybe most importantly, I own Madam Web. I reviewed Madam Web, and I told you it was a meh movie, but that there were things in it that I enjoyed. So if you're looking for somebody to just absolutely set the Sony Spider-Man universe on fire, find another podcast. I'm sure there are plenty. I'm sure there are plenty of others who would just love to drop trow on this universe. I am not one of them. You know why? Because I like being happy. I like enjoying my things. I like finding the good in things. And to be very honest with you, as I've said many times on this show and on the main show and everywhere else I've been, Vodka Stream, wherever it is, Squadcast Media, doesn't matter. I've seen actually subjectively bad comic book films. Because I watch comic book movies that were released well before the year 2000. Or you know what? How about well before the year 2010? So when I hear anybody talk about a movie in the shared cinematic universe era as the worst comic book movie ever made, I can't take that person seriously. That person is a child as far as I'm concerned. Because if you really are going to go back and see the pantheon of comic book films going all the way back to Superman and the Mole Men in 1950s, and you still think that movies today are worse than some of those movies in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, I can't take you seriously. I just can't. That's just my own subjective opinion. It's all subjective. You can feel angry and upset and you know, look at things as horrifically bad as much as you like, but it's not objectively bad because it's all a matter of opinion. And I have seen way, way, way worse than anything that the Sony Spider-Man universe has given us since 2018 whatsoever. And I thoroughly enjoy Venom. I do. I thoroughly enjoy Venom, the very first film. I like Venom Let There Be Carnage for what it is. Like I said, I found good in Madam Web. It's not a ton, but I found good in Madam Web. I did find good in Morbius. And you know what? I found good in Venom the Last Dance. I like Venom the Last Dance, actually. I like the Venom trilogy with respect to the Sony Spider-Man universe. That's the pinnacle. Those three films, it's also financially the pinnacle. I mean, this is a franchise that through 6 films so far has made over $2 billion. And yes, the vast majority of that is Venom, even though Morbius, Madam Web, you know, they both made more than what their production budgets were. But, you know, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, this is not going to be a kill it with fire fest. I don't do that. I seriously don't do that. If I ever review a movie, I'm not going to spend the entirety of the review telling you how horrible it is and how much I hate it and how they shot themselves in the foot with an arrow, a hunter's arrow. That's what one of the stupid-ass IGN reviews said. No, this is not a hate fest. It just isn't. This is going to be a rational, calm, reasonable review. And if you don't want that, you are welcome to go elsewhere and listen to a hate fest. This is not going to be a hate fest. However you feel about this film, whether you're even going to see it or not, I imagine a number of you not even really interested in seeing this one. But I'm going to offer you my honest thoughts as somebody that at the very least respects the Sony Spider-Man universe for its existence. I am not somebody asking, why on earth would Sony want to do this? Somebody asked for it. Somebody thought this was a good idea. It is a tortured universe with respect to production issues, delays, and other plans that they were going to do before and after the Sony hack, right? Like, it is one of those kind of, you know, misaligned universes, if you will, in terms of luck and in terms of production stuff going on. But I enjoy it for what it is, and I think that's a good window into my high-level thoughts for Kraven the Hunter, which are as follows. I didn't hate it. Seriously, I don't hate it. It takes a lot. It seriously takes a lot for me to hate these types of movies, you know, and listen, it's not a great movie. No, it's very meh. It is. It's very much a meh action movie, you know, with respect to several different aspects of it that I'll get into here in a little bit, but I didn't hate it. It was hardly the worst thing I've ever seen. Whether we're talking about movies or comic book movies, I did not hate the film. You know, I went into it knowing what to expect, first of all, because as far as the Sony Spider-Man universe is concerned, you should know what you're expecting going into it. You've seen enough of it. Whether it is the Venom movies, whether it's Morbius, whether it's Madam Web, you know what to expect with respect to this level of production, storytelling, etc. And if you actually go in with the mindset of, well, maybe this time it'll be... No, that's your fault. Sorry. You should level set yourself before going into these films. I do. And I paid money, and I don't regret paying money to see this film. I don't. Most certainly I do not. There are things in this film. In fact, there's one thing in particular that this film does that I think vastly is an improvement over something that the Marvel Cinematic Universe attempted to do just 2 years ago. I will definitely get into that in a little bit here. But I didn't hate this movie. I really didn't. Meh, to me, is not a bad thing inherently, to be honest with you. And it's all in terms of context, right? And it's not a blanket rule with respect to these types of films. You know, sometimes meh isn't great, you know, depending on your expectations, depending on what you've got, you know, your heart set going into this. And it's all subjective. It's all personal, right? But I'm not somebody that goes into these movies expecting them all to be the Batman. I'm not expecting them all to be Zack Snyder's Justice League. I'm not expecting them all to be Captain America the Winter Soldier. That's the pinnacle, right? That's the top of the list. Those are the creme de la creme, if you will. Not every comic book movie is going to be that. By the same token, not every comic book movie is going to be Thor, Love, and Thunder. They just aren't. And I think maybe for me, probably the biggest thing that separates a movie like this and any of the Sony Spider-Man movies like this from a movie like Thor: Love and Thunder is that at least when I watch these movies, I don't see a bunch of lowest common denominator dick and fart joke humor. I don't see that, right? I feel like a lot of times when the Marvel Cinematic Universe is at the lowest, on the low end for me, subjectively speaking, that's what they try to do. They just try to go for cheap laughs and they do silly, stupid jokes and they just infuse so much humor into it that they just want to get all of the cheap giggles and all of the toilet humor and all the silly shit, right? Like I don't see silly shit done for silly shit's sake with these films. And sometimes they do those jokes, but I guess for me there isn't an overabundance of them, right? And that doesn't mean that they're necessarily better films subjectively speaking, but I just don't get I don't get the same bad vibes necessarily. This was the case, like again, if I'm comparing it to Thor: Love and Thunder, which is like at the bottom of the list for me with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or I guess if I go to DC, if I'm comparing it to Wonder Woman 1984, right? Like that's close to the bottom rung of the ladder for me for the DCEU in that regard, right? If I'm comparing it to those films, like the difference is that at least I didn't have to deal with the dumb humor throughout this particular film. It doesn't mean it was great. Doesn't mean there was a ton in there that, was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. No, nothing like that. I mean, there are some things in this movie that I actually do very much enjoy. But, overall, it's not the most cohesive project. It's not the greatest. But, I can at least look at it and go, I can have this on in the background and it's not going to bother me, right? It's one of those types of movies. I don't need it to be incredible all the damn time for these comic book films. I just don't in that regard. So, that's where I come down on it. And I know people have these expectations and the fans come out of the woodwork, right? And a lot of times I always compare what Sony does to what Marvel Studios does. And basically, if they don't do the same thing, if they're not on the same level, then clearly Sony is bad. And there's always this predilection, right? This preconceived, attack, if you will, or animosity towards Sony, because there are people that want Spider-Man to be, absorbed by Marvel Studios and cut Sony completely out of the picture, completely ignoring the fact that the 3 Spider-Man films that they enjoy in the Marvel Studios, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, are still Sony films, completely bypassing the Spider-Verse films. I own both of those as well, which are also exclusively Sony. Right, never mind that. No, Sony is horrible. Kill Sony with fire. Look at what they did to Venom. Look at what they did to Madam Web. Oh my goodness. And how many Madam Web fans existed before the movie came out? That all of a sudden, Madam Web, oh my goodness, all the Madam Web fans have been disrespected. Yes, because you cared that much about Madam Web beforehand. I seriously doubt that. I don't think that many of you cared about Morbius beforehand, and I definitely don't think that many of you cared that much about Kraven the Hunter. I'm sorry, the 2 fans of Kraven the Hunter that have been waiting their entire lives for this adaptation cinematically, well, sorry to you. I don't buy it for the rest of you. I just don't in that regard. So all these expectations and all of this fan logic and all this fan nitpicking that we do, no, doesn't cut ice with me. And yeah, I haven't read like any Kraven the Hunter stories in the comics, so I'm not even judging it against that as well. Comic accuracy means shit to me with respect to this. And in many ways, I think that can keep me happier when I watch these films, because my expectations are not so high, so impossibly high, that I don't forget this is an adaptation written by screenwriters and Hollywood producers that are trying to appeal to the general audience more than they appeal to the actual fans. And so the question then becomes, how much did this appeal to the general audience? And I think there are some things in here that could appeal to the general audience, but not a ton. But again, not enough for me to be like, oh my goodness, this is the worst thing I've ever watched. No, not even close. Kraven the Hunter is not even close to that for me. It is solid meh. Very much in the same vein as Madam Web, very much in the same vein as Morbius, very much in the same vein as Venom Let There Be Carnage. It's meh for me, and I'm fine with that. I am. I'm completely okay with that. So that begins my high-level thoughts with respect to Kraven the Hunter. Now, how about the cast? Well, it's not a terrible cast, right? I know these names, right? I know Aaron Taylor Johnson. I know Ariana DeBose. What else have I seen Ariana DeBose in? It's got to be, there's got to be something here. Let me look at her filmography. Let's see. Oh, well, okay, no movies. I've seen no movies that Ariana DeBose is in. I haven't even seen Hamilton. Okay, but I know the name. Oh, she's been in television as well. What's this? Blue Bloods, Schmigadoon, Saturday Night Live. Okay, no, I've seen nothing that Ariana DeBose has been in, but I have heard the name, right? So not a ton of thoughts on her, but like I said, I know Aaron Taylor Johnson because obviously Godzilla, when he was Pietro, Quicksilver in Avengers Age of Ultron, right? I've seen some other things that he's been in. Kick-Ass, of course. Kick-Ass is the first thing that I ever saw Aaron Taylor Johnson in. He's fine. I really don't have a whole lot of issues with what he did in this film because he's not being asked to do a ton except be the leading man action hero, right? Can you do the stunts? Can you look like you're imposing? Can you handle yourself? Can you climb buildings? Can you jump off of ledges? Can you be this crazy acrobatic version of a Spider-Man villain that we're turning into an anti-hero? Can you do that? Does it look awesome? Can you sound imposing? Can you sound brooding at times even though we're not giving you a whole lot of range with your dialogue? Yeah, he does that. Right? Is he kind of one note? Yeah, sure he is. But it's just, what? I mean, what kind of depth and development am I looking for in a movie like this? It's not that type of a film, to be honest with you. Again, it's not the Batman. It's not Avengers Infinity War. It's like I'm not holding it up to those standards in that regard. So I didn't have a complaint. I really didn't have many complaints at all about Aaron Taylor Johnson. He was just standard action hero for a comic book film, whichever, right? And honestly, as far as emotional range, I guess the actor that had the most of it in this film really was Fred Hetzinger. And I don't know, let's see, he's been in Pam and Tommy. Apparently he's in Gladiator 2. He's in, Thelma, Nickel Boys, Butcher's Crossing. I never heard of this guy. But his character actually did have some emotional range and some character range and some character development, right? In fact, I would say his character, who was Sergei's brother, Kraven's brother, if you will, going forward, his character, Dimitri, actually did have some range, actually did have some character growth. He is not the same Dimitri at the end of the movie as he was at the beginning of the movie. I like the way Fred Hetzinger played it, right? That was cool. What happened with his character arc, I actually did like for what it was, right? Wasn't great, but there were some parts of it that I did legitimately enjoy. I don't have a whole lot to say about Ariana DeBose's character, going back to her for a second, because I feel like she was a very one-note character, extremely, and didn't have a whole lot going for it with respect to what she was doing. I also felt like a lot of her dialogue was ADR, at least it looked like ADR, seemed like ADR in that regard. Like a lot of automatic dialogue replacement, not just for her, but also for Aaron Taylor Johnson and other characters as well. That goes into a production issue, which I'll talk about a little bit later with respect to Sony, that's kind of been present throughout all of their films in the Spider-Man universe, if you will. Even some parts of Venom are like that. But at any rate, she was meh in that regard, one note. Alessandro Nivola was Alessandro Nivola. I've seen him in a decent amount of things. Best Laid Plans, Jurassic Park 3. He plays the villain. He's the Rhino. Okay. What kind of one-note villain can he play? This kind of one-note villain. All right. Sometimes one note isn't like this horrible thing for me. It really isn't. And again, it goes to having lowered expectations for the film. I'm not going into it looking for this incredible, massive comic book world set piece. It is what it is. It's part of a universe that doesn't have a whole lot of interconnectivity or massive planning going for it. So, okay, you're throwing it out there to see if we can have 2 hours of some cheap fun. And for 2 hours, I got some cheap fun with him being the Rhino. I liked parts of how he played it. I liked the voice. Some of what he said was funny. Truthfully, there were some lines and some quips, some bad guy stuff that he does that I did enjoy. I did have some fun with it. It was like, all right, you're twirling the mustache for 2 hours, but whatever. That's what you are. You've been written and designed as a mustache twirling villain for the purpose of this film. Cool. Okay. You know what? I liked him better than the Foreigner. Christopher Abbott's character. I really didn't understand. His character was just kind of there, and I know that there's probably a ton of comic book lore with all these characters. For Brent, anybody else, Scott, anyone else that's just like into Marvel lore, like any of you that read Marvel comics, I'm sure that there's a ton of lore. I know there is with Rhino. I know there is with Kraven. I'm sure there is with Calypso, which is who Ariana DeBose plays, and Dimitri, and all of that, and the Foreigner. I'm sure there is. Ton of it. I don't really know any of it. So I go into this with a blank slate. And I guarantee that helps me enjoy this film a lot more than any of you guys or any others. I guarantee that helps me a great deal. But I'm fine with that. I am. I'm perfectly okay with that. It is what it is. But here, I'll tell you the one thing, because it's within this cast. Here's the one thing that I think this film does that absolutely is vastly better than what a particular Marvel Cinematic Universe film does, and I mentioned the film earlier. Russell Crowe as Nikolai, their father, in this film is light years better in his performance than he was as Zeus in Thor: Love and Thunder. I will go ahead and say that. Subjectively speaking, it's all subjective. He was way better. He was like normal Russell Crowe as an actor in this. And again, he's not being asked to do much either. He is a one-note bad person. He is a one-note evil, like, patriarch that is screwing over his kids and screwing them up all manner of socially, mentally, all that jazz and everything, right? He's not a good person. He is a crime boss. He's an evil individual, a poacher, all that stuff, right? He's not good. And Russell Crowe knows how to play evil Russian with an accent like that. And to me, however you feel about his accent, it was way better than whatever they asked him to do for 10 minutes on like a couple of days of shooting for Thor: Love and Thunder. And again, you know what it goes back to? An absence of dick and fart jokes. An absence of lowest common denominator bullshit. I appreciated that. I appreciated Russell Crowe being closer to what he normally does when he's a stronger actor than what they asked him to do in Thor: Love and Thunder. So that is the one thing that I will absolutely say this movie, Kraven the Hunter, absolutely vastly superior in that regard. And I know that's not saying much because I don't have high thoughts on Thor: Love and Thunder. It again, as I said, lowest rung on the totem pole for me within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Even though I owned the movie, I only paid $10 for it. You can't own part of a set. But Russell Crowe, way better in this film than he was in that film. So that's the one thing I can say that this movie does better than a film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But yeah, overall, there wasn't anything about this cast that like wowed me, but there also wasn't anything about this cast that like absolutely just, kill it with fire. No, certainly not. The cast was all right. The cast was solid. I'll put it that way. It was solid for the type of movie that they were making. So ultimately, when it comes to these types of movies having a glaring weakness, it's usually the writing, and that's definitely the case here in my subjective opinion. With Kraven the Hunter, this is not a great script. It isn't. It's got 3 writers, Richard Wenk, Art Markham, and Matt Holloway. I've seen some of those names before. Richard Wenk is also the one who wrote the story, and it's the story itself. Like, you can see A to B kind of where it comes from, basically Sergei and Dmitri, were 2 boys being raised by their crime boss father, and he's a poacher, and, basically, putting them in harm's way, like trying to, survival of the fittest type stuff, and, the boys get screwed up, if you will. Kraven and Dmitri, neither one of them really like their father, but Kraven is the one that, after nearly dying at the hands of, a lion attack, if you will, like, and thanks to the help of young Calypso, whatever potion she gives him, that's, brings him back to life, gives him all these crazy abilities, and not that he's like a mutant or anything, but just he is very athletic and dexterous and becomes this incredible hunter, right? And it leads to him being this like great hunter of people, in his adult years. And I suppose that's because his father was so evil that set him on that path, right? Where he's just, I'm going to hunt all the evil of the world. And okay, I guess there's not really a whole lot of connective tissue with respect to depth and development of this, even with this movie being 2 hours and 7 minutes long. Not everything is connected. Not everything is fleshed out as well. And there's a lot more character work that could have been done here. There's a lot more that could have been written for these characters, that just wasn't set up incredibly well. And that's where the clunkiness comes into play a lot of times. It's just that the story is not as complete, right? And this is a recurring theme with Sony Spider-Man Universe films, because that's how Morbius felt. That's how Madam Web felt, is you took some bits and pieces out that maybe you did it for production purposes, or maybe you never filmed it because you didn't write it on the page, but you're just skipping a lot of stuff. You're skipping a lot of emotional development. You're skipping a lot of character development that all of these characters really could use if you were going to make this a stronger film, but you weren't interested in doing that. At least it didn't look like it was. So you just kept everything one note and surface level. Well, it doesn't work all that well, and doesn't really give the audience a very genuine ideal of what these characters like. We're not meant to care for these characters as much as we could in that regard. There's a way that you could have written Aaron Taylor Johnson as Kraven, where we would, show some emotion for him, where we would feel for him, right? Where he'd be more than just an action set piece. They didn't quite do that. They did that a little bit more with Dimitri, a little bit more, but only in terms of like the whole idea of he felt like he was a weak kid and that he wanted to get stronger and his pursuit of wanting to become stronger, right? Like that's really where his depth and development comes into play as a character, but there's still not necessarily enough there to keep this plot going, right? Because there's also this whole thing about Kraven. He's just a myth and a legend told to the underworlds, to keep them in line and to scare them, right? So you got criminals who think he's not real, and then you have others who are like, no, he's real, and once you're on his list, you don't get off it, right, until you're dead, that type of deal. And we don't really see that legend fleshed out, right? There are ways that you can show, from an innocent bystander standpoint, from the general audience within the film's standpoint, there are ways that you can break that down and show the lore, right? And the tale being told, right? Hey, you know what? You kids better do right. Don't become a bad person or Kraven the Hunter will get you. There's nothing like that in the film. And that would have really served to help support that and help build up that menace that we're supposed to be feeling, that these criminals are supposed to be feeling with Kraven. It never really feels like that. It just seems like they know he's there and they're doing everything they can to kill him, and he is constantly escaping it to come back and kill them. And it's like, okay, from a basic action movie standpoint, that works, but you miss a couple of levels in terms of depth if you don't flesh that legend out just a bit more, right? And it wouldn't even take him that much. Couple of scenes here and there of showing the impact of Kraven and how everyone else is reacting to him, and show the fear, right? Show the real fear that these crime bosses and lords and drug dealers and poachers and everybody are feeling. Show that, and then maybe it'd be like, hey, it might add a little bit more depth and development to that, right? But there just wasn't a ton there. So yeah, this is not the strongest story. This is not the strongest script in terms of how it's presented. It's not the best, the most cohesive story that we could see for something like this. So yeah, that ultimately does end up being a weakness overall. Probably the biggest weakness, I would say, of this particular film. And the reason that I would call the writing the biggest weakness of this particular film is because visually speaking, it's 50-50. And when I say that, I mean there's some visual things that this film does poorly with respect to editing and with respect to some of the production stuff that I was talking about before. But there's also some stuff that this movie does visually that's actually quite striking. I very much liked a number of the action sequences. There's a chase sequence where literally Kraven is chasing a van, like, with no shoes on, like, and he's climbing up buildings and he's jumping up and down and, like, running in the streets, jumping on top of cars, and it's actually shot pretty well, truthfully. I actually like the way that it was composed. And there's other action sequences in the film that I think visually look really good. It's not perfect, right? But there's some things in it that I look, that stunt man wise, that stunt people wise, that I think look really good. I don't dislike the way of the Rhino. I know it's an organic look. It's not a suit. It's not that they've gone like the organic, like chemical route with Alessandro Nivola's Rhino in that regard, and they keep teasing the full look throughout the film, and then when you get to the end of the film, it's like, okay, here's the climactic battle, and yes, you're going to see him in full painful Rhino, situation here, and I didn't mind that. I thought it looked all right. Seriously, I've seen worse with respect to the CGI in that regard. So there's a lot of visual stuff here that I do like, and with respect to that, and even like what some of the actors are doing, I know this director, J.C. Chandor, Jeffrey McDonald Chandor. I know this filmmaker. I've seen a previous film of his. He hasn't done a ton of movies, but his very first feature film, Margin Call from 2011, I have seen that movie. I do like that movie. And that's a movie that has really an all-star cast, right? The now disgraced Kevin Spacey, unfortunately, but Paul Bettany, Jeremy Irons, Zachary Quinto, Penn Badgley, Mary McDonnell, Demi Moore, Stanley Tucci. That's a movie, if people have never heard of it, it's a fictional film that takes place at a fictional Wall Street investment bank during the beginnings of the 2007-2008 financial crisis, right? Like, how The Big Short like, with which I have not seen, but that's the one with Brad Pitt and Steve Carell and others that is connected to, it's about the financial crisis. Well, Margin Call is like a fictional one, like kind of set in the same vein, right? But it's completely fictionalized. That's a really good movie. It is. It's a really good dramatic movie. So I know J.C. Chandor is a good director. I do, at least from that. I haven't seen All Is Lost or Most Violent Year, and I haven't seen Triple Frontier, which that's the Ben Affleck action film that also features Oscar Isaac, Charlie Hunnam, Garrett Hedlund, and Pedro Pascal that was released on Netflix a number of years ago. I have not seen that film. That's another one of J.C. Chandor's movies, but I heard good things about it. So I don't think it's a case of J.C. Chandor being a bad director here. I'm not going to put so much of this on him. I really think that a lot of it does come down to, like I said, the writing before, and then visually speaking, this movie just has some production issues, right? There's some editing choices that I don't necessarily agree with. A couple of continuity errors here and there, and ADR pops up, not like all throughout, but there are just times where it's like, okay, the ADR is not as strong here as it could be. Not sure what you were doing in post-production, and that's really the biggest like complaint I could have with respect to all of this. Is just I don't think the post-production process was quite as smooth and quite as well thought out as it could have been. It does hamper this film structurally in a visual sense, right? Apart from the really well-designed action set pieces, apart from a rhino design that I really didn't have any issues with the organic touch CGI wise, even the foreigner's effects, right? That this crazy like time delay effect that he has on his victims before he kills them, that type of thing, right? Like that, even that was kind of cool, right? I didn't have any issues with that. And again, these are things that I, would also apply to Morbius and Madam Web in that regard, and maybe even sometimes with the Venom films as well. It's just something about the way that Sony does this, and you know what I could call it here? How about this? Here's an epiphany I had the other day, yesterday rather, because I saw this yesterday in an empty theater on a Thursday preview. I went at 5:00, and I know it gets darker here, during this time of year in the Midwest. But I went to the theater, the theater that I've gone to so much, the Palladium in Birmingham. It's a really awesome theater that's been around for years. And, it's me, and I got there early, maybe 5 minutes before the movie started, and then one guy came in late. And it was just literally me and one other person watching this movie the whole time. Not a huge outpouring whatsoever, even at this point in time. And I know it's Thursday, but still, it's Thursday, like close to holidays or whatever, right? But I had this thought with respect to the production of this. Part of me would like to call the Sony Spider-Man universe the Avi Arad verse, because Avi Arad, to me, I feel like he's the biggest consistent factor throughout all of Sony's Marvel attempts, right? And if we go back and look at the movies that he was an executive producer on, I mean, we know the good ones, right? Blade, X-Men, the first Spider-Man film, yes, of course. But we also know him from Hulk. We know him from Daredevil. We know him from The Punisher. We know him from, well, not the Punisher part. Well, no, he was a producer on The Punisher. We know him from, the other Blade films, Elektra, Spider-Man 3, right? Like, there is a Ghost Rider and Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance, right? Like, we know him from all of these non-Marvel Studios Marvel films, right? And it just seems like he skirts a lot of stuff. He skips a lot of the development. He skips a lot of the character stuff, and he just wants to show you visual awesomeness. Remember, this is the guy that, really pushed for Venom to be in Spider-Man 3, even though Sam Raimi reportedly did not want that to be the case. Avi Arad insisted that he be shoehorned into a film that Sam Raimi reportedly was originally only going to do Sandman as a villain for that film. And this just feels like the Sony Spider-Man universe is an extension of what he's always done as a comic book action film producer, right? Surface level, not a whole lot of depth. I feel like that's the Avi Arad way, largely, right? And there are certain directors and there are certain other crews that can overcome that. But if he is allowed to throw his weight around a whole lot. And I know he's not the only producer on this film. I know he's not the only producer for the Sony Spider-Man Universe films. I know that Matt Tolmach and David Haushalter were also listed as producers in this film, but still, I feel like this is the Avi Arad way, right? Avi Arad has gotten a chance to do his own version of Marvel films, and, unless he has a Raimi or, you know, a John Watts or somebody else to like kind of hold his production nonsense in check doesn't necessarily work. And again, not putting this on J.C. Chandor. I think he did what he could, truthfully. But maybe comic book films like this are just not his wheelhouse. Maybe he does like the more dramatic flair, and he did what he could with the actors, he did what he could with the set pieces, but this was largely an Avi Arad and company show. And it just feels like that, right? And again, I won't call them bad movies. I will certainly point out plenty of movies from beforehand that are vastly worse than Avi Arad films, but I do think this is the Avi Arad effect, most certainly. I think we've experienced the Avi Arad effect for a long time now. We really have. And I guess for people who don't care for his work, just be thankful that he is not an active part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe outside of the 3 Spider-Man films that, you know, are a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in that regard. But yeah, that's the biggest takeaway I could say with this. You know, visually, 50-50. I think there's some good things visual effects wise and you know, in terms of portrayal of what's going on with this film, but I think there's some production and editing stuff that just absolutely leaves a lot to be desired, which again, that's kind of par for the course for the Sony Spider-Man universe for a number of these movies. But I will tell you, one of the bright spots of Kraven the Hunter is the score. I actually really do like the score for this film. Like, it's orchestral, and, you know, maybe we don't hear it quite as much as we should, but, you know, this isn't a film that is, like, besieged with needle drops and, like, pushes the score off to the side. No, there's a lot of dramatic elements. There's a lot of dramatic tension and orchestrations in this film to the point where I was like, oh, okay, no, I like this. I like it. You know, that we've got the brass here. We've got, you know, some foreboding, dramatic stuff for, you know, the slower scenes and for the more thrilling, more tension-filled scenes, right? Like, there was absolutely some emotional weight that was placed into the score with certain moments in the film, and, you know, I wondered who the composer was throughout, and then, of course, was pleasantly surprised to see Benjamin Wallfisch. Benjamin Wallfisch is now becoming a veteran, you know, not just in terms of, I mean, comic book films, but just composing in general. You know, some of the big ones that we know him from Shazam, right? That was, I think, the first one that, you know, really, like, you know, caught our radar, I guess, with respect to the comic book world, right? But, you know, he did Andy Muschietti's It film. He did Blade Runner 2049 for Denis Villeneuve. I think he worked with Hans Zimmer on that one, if I'm not mistaken. You know, he's done, like, King of Thieves. Let's see. Oh, the Hellboy. Is this the David Harbour one? Yes, the David Harbour Hellboy film. He did that. The Invisible Man from Leigh Whannell, which I still need to watch. That's on my list. He did the 2021 Mortal Kombat movie, which I didn't dislike. It was okay. It was what it was. But he did the Flash score for Andy Muschietti's The Flash, and I did like his score there for sure. He just recently scored Alien Romulus, which is also on my list. I gotta, you know, screw up my courage and figure out how to, you know, to watch that film. But no, he's good. He's good. Benjamin Wallfisch is a good composer, and in this particular film, he's also joined by a pair of other composers, Evgeny Galperin and Sacha Galperin. I don't know these names. Evgeny is a French composer, says he has Russian and Ukrainian roots, moved to Paris in 1990, and his brother Sacha is the other one, and they collaborate on a number of things. I'm now just hearing of them. This is my first, you know, introduction to them, and I imagine a lot of, based on what I'm seeing here with the, you know, European cinema and emotional influences, you know, it says Modest Mussorgsky, Dmitry Shostakovich, and Claude Debussy were emotional influences for him. So I'm guessing a lot of the Russian influence and a lot of the European influence on the score, I'm guessing this came from the Galperines in that regard. And you do hear that, right? You do hear, you know, like this movie starts off with, like, and I don't know what piece of music this is, but it starts off with like this Russian orchestral, you know, chant, like not Gregorian chant, but you know what I mean, like this orchestral, like operatic, Russian operatic song. I've heard it before. I'm pretty sure I heard it in like Hunt for Red October, something like that. But yeah, I mean, I like the score for this film. That's one of the high points of this movie. I like what Wallfisch and the Galperines did. I do think it added some extra added weight to this. I didn't feel like it was out of place, to be honest with you. I also didn't necessarily think that it was, I mean, maybe on some levels you could see it as a little bit bigger than the film, but I think that the way that it was composed, it does fit the film that we're watching. It could have been, if Kraven the Hunter had been a stronger film, I think that the score still would have matched it. The score was good for either way, right? Like the way that they put it together. And they probably would have added some more pieces to it had it been a little bit bigger. But I do think it fit what we saw on screen, however surface level it was that we might have seen it. So now I think that's probably the highest point of the film for me is the score, honestly. So hats off again to Wallfish, who's definitely becoming a veteran here and really coming into his own as a composer over the last 5-10 years, and the Galperines for their both Evgeny and Sacha for their contribution to this, for sure. Really dug it, really did. So yeah, overall, Kraven the Hunter is hardly a great movie, but it's not a kill it with fire movie. It's not a movie where I'm just like, oh my god, I can't believe I wasted $12.19, which is what I paid, to go see that movie. No, I don't regret it. I don't. I do not regret seeing the film. It's not one of those where it's like, I will never watch this film again. And there are certain movies, if you go back, anybody who was a patron at Squadcast Media, if you listen to any of our reviews for like some of those films there, I do have some of those kill it with fire thoughts with some of those movies. There are definitely comic book movies that I've seen that I just absolutely will never ever watch again. You couldn't pay me to watch them. This is not one of them. This isn't even close to that. And if you're asking me to rank this movie along with any of the other Sony Spider-Man universe movies for anybody that cares, I would really just put it on the same level as like Morbius and Madam Web. And I'm sure that does not inspire you to watch it. You don't have to. But again, at this point, you should know what you're getting into with this franchise. I knew I wasn't going into it thinking, oh, well, maybe this is going to be different. Maybe this is going to be like the first Venom. No, clearly the Venom trilogy is in a different place in this franchise than the other 3 films are, the other 3 or 4 films in that regards. And I'm okay with that. Because again, I don't need all of these films to be so amazing. The amazing ones are amazing, and we're going to get those. But, a lot of this, one of the sentiments I hear that really pisses me off a lot of times from fans is when I hear people, especially on social media, talk about how, well, if you pay for shit, then you're just excusing shit and you're not holding them accountable for making better films. What? Hold them accountable? Listen, entitled jackass. That's not what this is about. This is about creatives and, Hollywood studios deciding that they're going to put together a film. They put it out there for consumption, and it is your choice to whether you want to watch it or not. We're not owed these movies. Okay, just because 10, 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, however long it was now, Marvel decided to build their shared cinematic universe plan and Hollywood copycat it, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden now we're entitled to comic book movies being to our level, especially since our level is very subjective. Now, I'll go on the horrible site here, the site that really doesn't mean shit whatsoever, and just go ahead and point out, wait a minute, why is the score missing? No, is that not loaded? Hang on. I'm looking I'm at Rotten Tomatoes. Oh no, here it is. Okay. It's 16% rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. All right, whatever. Who gives a shit? It's all these angry critics that just want to look. Kraven the Hunter is a terrible movie, but you almost feel sorry for it. Yeah, okay, Peter Howell, I feel sorry for you, you jackass. Or like other Sony productions in the same vein, Kraven the Hunter alternates between entertainingly awful and just bad. Often the intended tone is anyone's guess. See, this arrogance that critics love to just, they love to make themselves sound more important than they actually are. No one gives a shit about them as regular human beings in real life. Nobody would recognize their assholery in real life. It's not like people are going like, oh yeah, Jake Wilson, oh, I heard what you said. Oh, way to stick it to him. No one cares about you like that, Jake Wilson. No one cares about your shitty tone with respect to that. No, critics just love to shit on things. They just love to be angry little shitballs in that regard. This is just another avenue for me to talk about how much I dislike critics. I really don't like them whatsoever, because this is all they do. They don't sit here and try to give you any type of nuance or actually try to give you a critique. They just want to shit on things. They just want to be pretentious jackasses all the damn time. And I look at the audience score, and it's funny, Kraven the Hunter is not being review bombed, at least not according to this. The popcorn meter has it at 69%, because it's just a standard action film, right? There's nothing in there that is like, groundbreaking. There's nothing in there that is like horrifically off-putting either. It's just even keel, and there are a couple of action sequences that are kind of badass, right, in that regard, right? And you look at some of these audience reviews, one Sheldon S. It was not bad at all. I really enjoyed watching this movie. Okay. Very good movie. Lots of action. Yeah, it does have a lot of action because it's an action movie. There's really not a whole lot left to it. It doesn't have the same depth as some of the bigger films. And some people, largely in the general audience, can go into a movie and just turn all the criticism shit off and have fun with the really fun parts that they like to watch in it. Others, have to critique it and be assholes about it. It is what it is, and you can make your decision on which one you want to be. But, obviously this isn't going to do terribly well at the box office. Did anybody expect that this was going to do well at the box office? No. I question how many people are even really going to see this film. How many people am I going to get to listen to this particular review? I don't know. But if I go to Deadline here, let's see. It says, Moana 2 and Wicked are still, holding strong, I guess, at the box office. But it says that Kraven the Hunter is seeing a $4.7 million Friday in 3,211 theaters, including $2 million from Thursday previews. The hope is that it crawls to 12 to 13 million for the weekend. Oh boy. Oh, whatever. Screw off, Deadline, the oh boy. See, again, people can't write shit without being snarky assholes about it. I don't care. It's just tired of being snarky. Tired of being angry about shit. This is why critics suck. This is why a lot of entitled assholery fans suck. It's like, whatever. It is what it is. I saw the movie for 2 hours and 7 minutes. I was just like, let's see what's going on here. I like these parts. I like those parts. Some of these other parts are clunky. Some of those other parts are clunky. It's not the best movie in the world, but I'm hardly going to be all like fire and brimstone, like, oh boy, oh my goodness, right? No, screw that. Whatever. And I guess reportedly, this is it for the Sony Spider-Man universe, and I'm sure there are plenty of people saying, good riddance to bad rubbish, like anybody was forcing you to watch the damn movies in the first place. Nobody forced you to watch the Venom movies. Nobody forced you to watch Morbius. Nobody forced you to watch Madam Web. And certainly nobody is forcing you to watch Kraven. So you can just keep your mouth shut and move forward and, wait for the next Marvel Cinematic Universe film or wait for Superman, whatever. I don't care what you're waiting for. Point is, don't have to be a dick with respect to this kind of stuff. It is what it is. Not everybody on planet Earth is going to dislike this film. There are going to be certain people that do like this film. And I'll tell you what, since I already own the first two Venom movies and Madam Web, I don't own Venom The Last Dance yet because it hasn't been released in glorious steelbook yet. It will be, I think, in January, if I'm not mistaken. And I didn't get Morbius at launch, but I will find a version of that steelbook and I will get that. I will own it. And I'll own Kraven. I will. I own worse movies. I own the entire Christopher Reeve Superman set, right? I own all four of those films. The first two are great. The last two are garbage. They're not good, subjectively speaking. But there are parts in them that I do enjoy, and you can't own part of a set. So I own them. I told you earlier, I own Thor Love and Thunder. I paid $10 for it, thank the Lord, because I, found it on a set, or on a sale rather, when Best Buy was getting rid of their physical media inventory. I got that steelbook, right? But, I own movies that are way worse than any of the films in the Sony Spider-Man universe, right? So I don't give a shit what these critics say. I don't care what, angry fans and people who just want to be assholes say. I don't care. It is what it is. One day, if I just want something on in the background and I don't feel like, paying that much attention to it, I'll throw it on. I don't care. It is what it is. I wasn't like so incredibly like turned off or disappointed by the Sony Spider-Man universe. So if it is only these 6 films, the Venom trilogy, Morbius, Madam Web, and Kraven the Hunter, so be it. Who knows what would have happened without the Sony hack and without some of the stuff from the past, whether we got that Sinister Six movie or not, or some of the other plans, if they had connected them to the Amazing Spider-Man films and Garfield actually got a chance to get his trilogy, because I still think his Spider-Man is the one that fits the best with Tom Hardy's Venom. Who knows? That's a what-if situation if there ever was one, right? And I own those Spider-Man movies as well, right? Because I've got the Spider-Man Legacy Collection 4K steelbook as well. Like, either way, I don't see anything in this franchise. I don't see anything with Kraven the Hunter that makes me want to kill it with fire. I'm perfectly fine with these movies and this particular franchise being meh in that regard. Seriously, there are plenty of other films that, I feel more strongly about as far as like badness, subjectively speaking. But it is all subjective. It is what it is. And for me, I don't regret seeing them. I don't regret seeing, any of the previous Sony Spider-Man universe films, and I don't regret seeing Kraven the Hunter. It is what it is, and I'll get it. The pre-orders are already out for it for the steelbook. I don't know if they have a date for it yet. In fact, I'll look here because I have the steelbook Discord that I am a part of, and let's see where they have like a section for US Watch And, sometimes you can tell how well or how not well a film is doing by how quickly it goes up for pre-order. Sometimes in that regard, right? Like sometimes day of release. Like today is the official, release date. Thursday was the preview night. Today's the official release date for Kraven the Hunter. And it does not have an official date for it yet, but I can pre-order it off of Amazon. I can pre-order it off of well, maybe not Amazon yet, but Walmart. I can definitely pre-order it off of Walmart in that regard. They better lower that damn price. Man, that's another point of conversation, is how ridiculous these prices are becoming for some of this physical media. But that's another discussion for another day. Point is, at some point I will own, in physical form and in digital form, the entirety of the Sony Spider-Man universe. Because I'm just fine with it being as high as the really good of Venom, the first Venom film, to the meh level of Morbius, Madam Web, and Kraven the Hunter. I am perfectly fine with it, and I am going to live a happier life being perfectly okay with that meh version of it. It is all subjective, and I subjectively choose to be a happier human. So, there you have it. That is how I win. Just being completely honest about it. And with that happiness, that'll do it for this particular episode of Flight Review. Thank you so much for joining me as I give you my honest thoughts on Kraven the Hunter, on the things of it that I like, the things of it that I didn't necessarily care for, and just how much I still just don't like critics and assholes with respect to movie reviews. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for listening to this and for supporting me at the Flightcast and all of my other shows and whatnot. If you saw Kraven the Hunter, if you have any interest, if you want to share your thoughts on Kraven the Hunter at all, whether my review talked you into giving it a shot or not, or whether you were going to give it a shot earlier or whatever, or if you have any thoughts with anything that I had to say with respect to the reception to Kraven the Hunter as somebody who has seen it or not, you know where to find me on BLUESKY now. I am on BLUESKY at Flightcast. That is the social media platform I am primarily on now, and I'm also on the Flightcast Facebook page. I reopen that. And of course, I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right. Take care. Stay safe out there. And I will see you all next time. Take it easy.